Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series where we take a look at Precon decks and bring them up to cut rate standards. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the Masters of Evil Precon from the Universes Beyond Doctor Who set, and its face commander, the progenitor of the Daleks himself, Davros Dalek Creator, which we'll be bringing up from its roughly $50 price point to an increased budget of $85 after upgrades. But before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content, and if you really like it, please consider supporting the channel directly, either through Buy Me a Coffee or through our Game Nerds affiliate link in the description. Also, if you haven't done so already, be sure to check out the ongoing 15k subscriber giveaway either on the card on this video or in the link in the description to enter for a chance to win a Bernard Ginger Sculptor Commander deck and to unlock sweet upgrades for it. So, with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commanders and playstyle. Davros Dalek Creator is a 3/4 artifact alien scientist with menace that costs 1 and Grixis that has the following ability. At the beginning of our end step, we create a 3/3 black Dalek artifact creature token with menace if an opponent lost 3 or more life that turn, and then each opponent who lost 3 or more life that turn faces a villainous choice, either having us draw a card or instead discarding a card themselves. Breaking down his core stats, Davros possesses a mid-weight CMC, a low-power average toughness stat block for his cost with built-in pseudo-evasion in the form of menace, and an ability that, so long as we're able to reliably inflict damage to our opponents, enables us to build up our board state with decent-sized evasive artifact bodies, and forces our opponents to either give us resources or get rid of their own. Taking a closer look at this ability, it's clearly a Group Slug payoff, aiming to help us build up our board state with decent-sized bodies while simultaneously either speeding us up by drawing us cards, or slowing down our opponents by stripping cards away from them as we deal damage to them on our turn. Now, while we certainly can get value out of this so long as we're able to consistently inflict 3 damage to a single opponent on our turn, we are incentivized to spread that damage around as much as we can to get the maximum value out of it. And, luckily for us, Grixis has no shortage of AoE burn effects that we can use to reliably accomplish this without having to rely entirely on Davros and his Dalek's less than reliable menace to do so. So, as we can see based on his ability, Davros is a commander that cares a lot about consistently dealing damage to our opponents on our turn to build up board presence, while simultaneously either generating us value through draw or stripping value away from our opponents via discard. The base deck, however, like a certain other Grixis Universes Beyond Precon I could mention, suffers from a lack of focus in the direction that our commander wants to go, containing a lot of cool build-arounds, but ones that don't really synergize with Davros in a significant way to get the maximum value out of his ability. So, in order to bring Davros' game plan into focus, we'll be pivoting this build hard into an all-in Group Slug playstyle, retaining the handful of AoE burn-focused cards and payoffs included in the base build, and then adding in a huge selection of new repeatable AoE burn sources to be able to proc Davros against all our opponents as often and as reliably as possible. Then from there, to further enable Davros, we'll also be adding in some AoE life loss sources that simultaneously attack our opponent's hands, making the villainous choice they have to make each turn even harder, and attacking on a handful of ways to double up on our multitude of triggered effects to get even more uses out of Davros, as well as the build's other sources of passive AoE burn and payoffs, leaving us with a rather ruthless and bloodthirsty build that even Davros would be impressed with, if not for the fact that it was built by an inferior race. So let us time travel back to the planet of Skaro, a world consumed by war for over 1,000 years, where a young Khaled child named Davros was saved from certain death by a mysterious stranger who appeared from a police box that, unknowingly, would later become his mortal enemy. This act inspired the boy to become a scientist, and eventually build a weapon to finally bring the bloody conflict on his planet to an end. And that weapon was a new life form named Daleks. They would be the ultimate evolution of Khalid kind, rid of emotions and equipped with the ultimate weapons to exterminate their enemies, even if those weapons look a bit like a plunger and an egg beater. Despite being their creator, however, these Daleks would not obey him, ironically due to his programming compelling them to destroy all other races that are not pure Dalek and being incapable of feeling mercy. So they proceeded to seemingly kill their progenitor. But this would not be the end for him, as he would survive thanks to his cybernetic enhancements to scheme anew, eventually creating a new breed of Dalek grown from his own flesh with him as their emperor, using his army of living weapons to subjugate and exterminate the inferior races, thereby cementing himself as one of the Doctor's most formidable adversaries. So, now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's briefly go over the cards that made the cut from the core build. Beginning with the burn-focused creatures we'll be retaining to help enable Davros' ability, we'll be hanging on to the Cult of Skaro, which has a 1 in 4 chance of burning all our opponents as it swings in to proc Davros, while its other modes consisting of draw, Dalek token creation, and artifact-centric +1/+1 counter distribution are still useful to us to either generate value or to grow and empower our board. Dalek Drone, which serves as a piece of ETB spot removal with burn attached that we can then use to continue proccing Davros thanks to its 3 power and built-in evasion. Cybermen Patrol as a way to ensure that every Dalek we create can reliably proc our commander as they swing in even if they're blocked thanks to granting them Afflict 3. And Psychorax Commander as either a source of ETB burn or AoE hand disruption depending on our opponent's choice when he comes down, either of which work nicely alongside Davros to keep up the pressure. Then moving on to the held over non-creature burn side of things, this is how it ends, and Exterminate will both be staying in as more spot removal with burn attached, the former being a non-destruction removal source that either forces our opponents to lose another creature or lose 5 life, while the latter has them lose 3 life regardless and lets us use our Daleks to replicate it in order to remove more creatures and inflict even more burn. Delete retains its spot as both a scalable board wipe that dodges our commander and the Daleks he creates, while being capable of inflicting enough burn to proc Davros after the dust settles, and Ensnared by the Mara keeps its position as either a means to steal spells away from our opponent's decks at no mana cost, or as a way to inflict a decent amount of burn to our opponents depending on their mana curve and then proc Davros for value. Then from there, we'll also be retaining the additional sources of Dalek tokens included out of the box to help us build up our board states alongside Davros while we burn out our opponents, such as the Dalek Emperor, whose high CMC becomes more manageable as Davros creates Dalek tokens and, when he comes down, forces our opponents to either begin sacking away their creature base or allowing us to build up ours with more Daleks. Dalek Squadron, which is 3 Daleks in a trench coat and a surprisingly effective play before Davros, considering we should generally have a safe attack for the main body to make in the early game, and our opponents will typically have to throw away real creatures to block our Myriad tokens. Doomsday Confluence, which serves as a scalable source of Dalek tokens that, if we don't need the board presence, we can instead use as a scalable AoE Edict or an AoE discard effect to pick apart our opponent's fields or hands. And lastly, Genesis of the Daleks, which gives us an ever-growing number of Daleks that culminates with our opponents deciding either to level the entire board of everything but our Dalek army, or having us sack away our Daleks to inflict at least 18 burn to each opponent, either one being game-ending in their own right. Then, as some additional non-Dalek artifact creatures we'll be hanging on to build up our board state alongside our Daleks, we have Weeping Angel, which initially serves as a very lethal surprise blocker that we can then use to very safely attack in with thanks to its combination of First Strike and what amounts to Super Death Touch, along with Cybermen Squadron, whose ability to turn our Daleks into Dalek Squadrons by granting them all Myriad is a fantastic way to increase our damage output and enable alpha strikes. We'll then also be running Blink and Death in Heaven as a pair of artifact creature token creating sagas to build up our board state with even further, along with providing us with non-destruction removal and graveyard hate respectively, as well as the legend Missy, whose passive helps us build up our board state with Cybermen while preventing any non-artifact creatures from hitting our opponent's bins as they die off, and whose villainous choice, despite occurring too late to proc Davros, is still a fantastic artifact payoff that can inflict serious amounts of burn to our opponents unless they're willing to let us draw cards instead. From there, as a way to get additional mileage out of Davros' ability, we'll be hanging on to both the Valyard and Auton Soldier, the former allowing us to double up on all the villainous choices in the build for additional value and/or disruption, while the latter can become a non-legendary clone of Davros to double up on his effect, or that of any of our other creatures instead if we'd rather. Then, with all the game plan specific cards we'll be keeping covered, we'll move on to the removal and wipes we'll be hanging on to help pad our core stats, such as Cyber Conversion and Snuff Out, both of which are fantastic sources of creature removal via their ability to turn even our opponent's commanders into vanilla tutus, or by being effectively free to cast. Feed the Swarm as a slow but flexible piece of removal that helps us deal with creatures and enchantments, the latter of which is somewhat difficult for our colors to do. Hunted by the Family as a very expensive but undeniably effective spell that forces our opponents to turn their best creatures into vanilla 1/1s, or instead allow us to get a copy of those creatures for ourselves. Ominous Cemetery as a piece of non-destruction creature removal that we can use from our land slot. And lastly, Blasphemous Act as a classic board wipe that easily allows us to retake control of the board for as little as a single mana if things start getting out of control. And then as some miscellaneous cards that we'll be keeping that don't quite enable our commander or our core stats, but are still useful to have access to, we'll be retaining Lightning Greaves as a way for us to protect Davros from targeted removal to ensure he sticks around for as long as possible, and Wound Reflection as a way for us to double all the damage our AoE burn sources deal to our opponents, which is again too slow to properly proc Davros, but considerably speeds up how quickly our burn sources can burn out our opponents, so we'll hang on to it. Then quickly going over the ramp sources that made the cut from the final build, we'll be hanging on to all the mana rocks from the base deck to help us speed up and/or fix our mana base, as well as providing us with some additional utility in the case of Thought Vessel and Laser Screwdriver, via either removing our maximum hand size limit or by the artifact tap down card selection and goad they provide, in addition to Wayfarer's Bauble as a source of cheap land base ramp to improve our mana base's speed and consistency even further. Then moving on to our retained mana lands, we'll of course be hanging on to Command Tower, Crumbling Necropolis, and Path of Ancestry as lands that tap for all our colors to help improve consistency, Exotic Orchard as an untapped land that taps for most, if not all our colors off our opponent's lands, the Horizon Land Fiery Islet, the Filter Lands Darkwater Catacombs and Shadowblood Ridge, and the mana-changing land River of Tears as more untapped lands that can tap for 2 of our colors for even more fixing, all the check lands, battle lands, reveal lands, and slow lands included in the base build retaining their spots, as more duels that can conditionally come into play untapped to improve our mana base's consistency without sacrificing speed, the bicycle lands and scry lands from the core build staying in, as well as slower duels that make up for their slow speed via the cantrip or card selection they provide respectively, and lastly, Terramorphic Expanse and Thriving More as one last source of fixing via the slow fetch or customizable mana generation they give us access to. Then, as our held over utility lands, both Manlands Creeping Tar Pit and Lava Claw Reaches will be keeping their spots as lands we can animate to reliably get in for damage if we need to, either through them being unblockable or due to their instant speed fire-breathing effect respectively, as well as Reliquary Tower, which provides us with another way to protect ourselves from overdrawing through Davros' effect. And lastly, we'll be keeping the 2 islands, 2 swamps, and 2 mountains included in the base build as our basics to round out our mana base. That leaves us with a final tally of 71 cards including basic lands we'll be keeping from the base build, leaving us with 29 cards to replace. So, now that we've covered all the cards that made the cut from the core build, let's move on to our upgrades. As mentioned previously, the main goal of this upgrade will be to go all in on the Group Slug aspect of the build in order to be able to reliably proc Davros against all our opponents as often as we can. So, in order to make room for the AoE burn pieces we'll be adding, we'll be cutting a good portion of the legendary creatures included in the base build that would make better build-arounds than pieces in R99. For example, Ashad the Lone Cyberman will be losing his spot, as he would be a much better fit to lead an artifact sacrifice heavy build of his own, so we can slot in Spear Spewer, who serves as a cheap, simple, and repeatable source of AoE burn that we can use each turn to help build towards Davros' damage threshold, and the Master's multiple incarnations, those being the Master Mesmerist, the Master Gallifrey's End, the Master Multiplied, and the Master Formed Anew, which again would be better off Helming Skulk, Artifact, Myriad, and Clone-themed decks respectively, all being replaced with Thermo Alchemist, Unruly Catapult, Nettle Drone, and a Lobber Crew, all of which we can tap down to inflict even more AoE burn to the table, and can sometimes even do so multiple times as we cast our instants and sorceries, our artifacts, or our multicolored spells. We'll then be replacing the card drawing Visler Turlo, the impulse drawing and conspiring Rassilon the War President, and the creature theft focused The Beast Deathless Prince, with the passive AoE burn sources Creeping Bloodsucker, Plague Spitter, and Spawn of Mayhem to keep the damage flowing while they pad our life totals, keep the board clear of X1s and or Kraken for even more damage in the air. The Ronnie's Goad focused game plan being cut in favor of Quakebringer, which inflicts even more passive burn, and on top of that, prevents our opponents from healing themselves while it's in play to make our damage even more dangerous, and the AoE milling and Cyberman creating the Cyber Controller being slotted out so we can slot in Loyal Subordinate, which is possibly our best creature to play before our commander to get our game plan going instantly thanks to the AoE 3 damage it inflicts alongside Davros every single turn. Then moving away from cutting legendary build-arounds and onto some more regular creatures to make room for more burn, the indestructible, ever-growing, and evasive Vashta Nerada will be benched in favor of Twilight Prophet, which can get the city's blessing rather quickly thanks to our token creation, and, when it does, becomes a consistent source of AoE life drain and draw each turn to enable Davros and replenish our hands, the exponentially multiplying the Flood on Mars losing its spot to Stormfist Crusader, which provides even more passive AoE burn along with draw, which is symmetrical but tends to help us more than our opponents since we'll be stripping cards out of their hands anyway, and the continually goading Renegade Silent being swapped out for Tectonic Giant, whose on attack trigger can proc Davros for all our opponents all on its own, or, in the event we're short on cards, we can use as Impulse Draw instead. And then with all our new burn-focused creatures covered, we'll be switching gears to some of the non-creature sources of burn we'll be adding to the build, with the creature sacking and or stealing Midnight Crusader Shuttle being smelted down to make room for Cryptolith Fragment, which is an on-theme mana rock that helps speed up and fix our mana base while burning the table as we use it. The decent but ill-fitting in this build goading damage amplifier The Sound of Drums being exchanged for Descent into Avernus, which provides more and more AoE burn and treasure generation with each passing turn to both proc Davros and give us the mana we need to cast the spells he draws us. The two unreliable burn and a draw source, the Toymaker's Trap, being replaced with Maestro's Charm, whose burn mode can trigger Davros against all our opponents on its own, or, if needed, we can alternatively use it as removal or card selection instead, and the somewhat strange Pillow Fort inclusion Propaganda being shelved in favor of Protection Racket, which forces our opponents to either give us extra cards or potentially take a decent amount of burn every single turn. And then to wrap up our new pure burn additions to the build, we'll be slotting out the way too specific Silver Bullet Time Reaper to slot in the Planeswalker Obnixilis of the Black Oath, whose AoE life drain and huge evasive token creation are perfect to get extra damage in to proc Davros, while his ult can generate us even more card advantage if we're able to get to it, and the bit too tribal-specific Gallifrey Council Chamber being terraformed into leech-ridden swamp, which serves as another easy-to-proc and repeatable source of AoE life loss from the relative safety of our land slot. Now, alongside our newly added arsenal of AoE burn sources, we'll also be adding in some sources of AoE discard with burn attached as ways to not only help proc Davros, but also to make his villainous choice even harder for our opponents as we start picking apart their hands. For instance, we'll be cutting the temporary clone Zygon Infiltrator for the legend Rankle Master of Pranks, whose evasive body and on-damage AoE draw with burn attached, discard and or edict removal are perfect to proc Davros while stripping away resources from our opponents, and replacing the 2-go wide-focused Centauran General with another legend in the form of Kroxa Titan of Death's Hunger, who rips cards out of our opponent's hands as he ETBs and attacks, and burns them on top of that if they try to pitch their excess lands, all while being a huge beatstick and castable from the bin thanks to escape. Then, as some additional non-creature sources of discard, we'll be replacing the far too expensive Great Intelligence's plan for the cheaper Court of Ambition, which still provides card advantage thanks to making us the Monarch, and again forces our opponents to choose whether they want to keep their cards in hand or take enough damage to enable Davros, and cutting the somewhat lackluster evasive artifacts, Cybermat and Clockwork Droid for the Planeswalkers, Obnixilis the Adversary, and Angrath the Flame-Chained, both of whose plus abilities can force our opponents to either discard or take damage, twice in the former's case thanks to the 3-loyalty non-legendary clone he can create of himself by sacking a Dalek token, and both in the latter's case to take the choice away from our opponents entirely, while also bringing additional utility to the table with either board presence generation and draw, or targeted removal and mass AoE burn. Then, with all our burn out of the way, we'll be adding in a few additional ways to get extra uses out of Davros as well as our other triggered abilities, with a fantastically named but much too specific hate spell Don't Blink, and the out-of-place repeated goat effect Day of the Moon being replaced with Strionic Resonator and a Lithoform Engine, both of which can copy any of our triggered abilities for only 2 mana a pop for additional value and burn, with the latter also allowing us to copy our instance, sorceries, or even any of our other spells if we have the mana to get even more value. And finally, to wrap up our new additions to the build, we'll be cutting the much too generic Solemn Simulacrum, the too expensive Cyber Ship, and the utterly useless Temple of the False God, so we can add in the Mana Rocks, Talisman of Creativity, Rakdos Signet, and Felwar Stone, giving one last boost to our mana base's speed and consistency to allow us to cast our spells as quickly and as reliably as possible. So, now that we've covered all 29 cards that we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. This deck currently has 27 creatures including our commander, 4 instants, 7 sorceries, 7 enchantments, 16 artifacts, 3 planeswalkers, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 30 sources of AoE burn, 4 sources of single target burn, 9 creatures who are Daleks and or other types of artifact creatures, 10 sources of Dalek and or other type of artifact creature tokens, 4 cards that care about artifacts, and 4 ways to copy our triggered abilities, leaving us with a build that contains a huge amount of burn to reliably trigger Davros and to chew through our opponent's life totals with, a decent artifact creature sub-theme to help bolster our board presence while we burn out our opponents, and a handful of ways for us to copy our commanders or any of our other triggered abilities to generate even more value or inflict even more burn. Then for general deck stats, we have 14 ramp sources, 12 card draw sources, 15 targeted removal sources, and 3 board wipes, giving us a pretty by-the-numbers spread of core stats without any real outliers. Looking at our mana curve, we have 4 1-drops, 18 2-drops, 15 3-drops, 14 4-drops, 5 5-drops, 4 6-drops, 3 7-drops, and 1 9-drop, giving us a mid-weight curve that aims to drop as many sources of repeatable burn as we can in the early game, ideally enough to be able to inflict 3 AoE damage per turn, followed by our commander, who will then force our opponents to either increase our tempo by having us draw cards, or to decrease their tempo by having them pitch cards. Then from there, we can sit behind our army of Daleks and other artifact creatures while we play more and more sources of burn, until our opponent's life totals are well and truly exterminated. The final price of this build then comes out to be $85.48 after upgrades. This price does not include tax or shipping, and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $50. The price of the cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. Now, for side grades, we can consider replacing Protection Racket for Giadrone Dahada if we'd rather have a more reliable source of AoE life drain over the potential card advantage generated by her predecessor, and exchanging Spawn of Mayhem for Palace Siege as another source of AoE life drain that heals us instead of hurting us, on top of being harder to remove if we don't mind lowering our creature base and increasing our mana curve. Then for further upgrades, I would first suggest replacing the Scrylands in the base build with at least their Painland equivalents to help speed up our mana base a bit more, since it can feel a bit slow in the early game, possibly swapping out the expensive removal spell Hunted by the Family to slot in Helm of the Host, which gives us yet another way to copy our commanders or any of our other AoE burn creatures' abilities by creating non-legendary clones of them, and, if we really want to, we can replace the walker Obnixilis of the Black Oath with the much more expensive walker Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge, whose plus ability drains as much as his predecessors with only Davros in play and only gets better as we cast and create other artifacts. And that's on top of making all our creatures and other planeswalkers cheaper by granting them artifact affinity, making him a very solid addition and honestly not even that expensive compared to other top ends. I don't even have a sarcastic remark here. I'm just genuinely surprised there's not a more expensive card that I can suggest for the build, and there it is. God damn it. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. Now, with the Masters of Evil Precon covered, let's throw it back all the way to the beginning by covering the Blast from the Past Precon and its face commanders, the Fourth Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith, so look forward to a historic themed build featuring them coming soon. In the meantime though, be sure to check out our currently ongoing, at the time of posting this, 15K subscriber giveaway, where we'll be raffling off a full commander deck being helmed by Bernard Ginger Sculptor built by yours truly, and, as is tradition, giving you the opportunity to unlock some sweet upgrades for it depending on how many new subscribers the channel gets, and how many likes the video gets before the drawing on November 15th. So either click on the card in this video or on the link in the description to go to the video where you can sign up for your chance to win. And, again, thank you all for your support for having helped the channel reach this milestone, as we wouldn't have gotten here without all of your support. And lastly, before we close out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel can't continue to grow without your support. And if you're feeling particularly generous, feel free to keep me caffeinated via buying me a coffee at the link in the description, or alternatively, use our Game Nerds affiliate link in the description if you're looking to purchase sealed MTG product, accessories, board games, or any of their other wide selection of products at low prices that include free shipping for orders over $75, and a rewards program that builds up store credit over time as you make your purchases. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the Cut Rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.